Okay, so in regards to camera gear, this year has probably been the best year of my life so far. First of all, I've managed to buy my dream camera, the Leica M11-P, earlier this year. And then Hasselblad approached me for a collaboration and I got the Hasselblad 907X out of it, which is also a camera that I had been dreaming of and honestly never believed that I could own it. However, in between the Leica Q2, the Hassi and the 907X, it felt like I almost had too many choices at times. Cruel fate, I know, but seriously, I actually had bought the M11P with the intention to use it as my everyday main camera for photography. But while I love shooting with it, the rangefinder certainly has its limitations. And so with another trip to the Netherlands coming up earlier in September of this year, I decided to just pack all of my cameras in my beloved companion backpack and bring it with the intention to mostly use the Leica M11P, but also have the ability to just use whichever camera I prefer. And so I guess the idea here for this video is to take you along a little family vacation trip and to show you how it went, which cameras I used and when and why, and how the M11P fared as a family vacation camera. Now obviously I'm not going to show you all of the photos that I took, mostly for our privacy's sake, but I hope that the images that I will show give you a bit of an idea of how it went. So let's get into it. I've been to the Netherlands almost every year since I was a baby. It feels like a second home to me. And going back now with my wife and our almost 1-year-old son in the summer just felt like such a full circle moment. One of the many things that I love about the Netherlands is that you can do just about anything in a short to medium distance on a bike. And so this time around we brought our 2 e-bikes as well as a bike trailer for our baby boy. And it was perfect. And it turned out that in the entire first week, once we arrived at our Airbnb, we didn't even bother to move our car once. We also brought our rooftop tent. This is a fairly recent acquisition, but still we've already used it for a few short camping trips and we absolutely love it. On this trip, however, we had no plans to go camping, but instead we just wanted to have it with us, to have a place to just kick back, maybe go for a little power nap at the beach and so on. And it was well worth bringing it. And so the first thing we did when we arrived was to go straight to the beach, set up the tent and just hang out for a while. Now photography wise, a tent like this is obviously a pretty confined space, so if you want to capture the entire space as a room and the atmosphere in it, it's usually a good idea to go for a rather wide lens. But since the widest lens that I have for the M11P is a 28mm lens and that really didn't cut it, I just decided to stick with the 35mm Voigtlander that I had on it already, and I fired off a few shots. Nothing too spectacular, but I still like the atmosphere. And after relaxing there for a while and going for a wander on the beach, we eventually decided to go to our Airbnb and settled in for our first night. We pick up our story again a few days later when we decided to go to a nearby seaside village called Veere, which was about a 30 or so minutes bike ride away. We actually had been to Veere the evening before, and I already took a couple of snaps with the 907X just for the fun of it, but we were mostly there to grab dinner at the De Werf restaurant and headed straight back home. But since Veere is an incredibly lovely little village, we just had to go there again the following day. And so I attached the Thule bike trailer to my bike and we set off. When we arrived, we were greeted by the most lovely type of weather that the Netherlands have to offer. Mild, warm temperatures, sunny but with a few fluffy clouds in the sky, and a nice sea breeze going at all times. It was just lovely. And so, of course, once we arrived at the marina near the village center, I immediately pulled out my M11P to get a couple of photos right away. around for a bit, went shopping and grabbed some pancakes, which were delicious by the way. Thanks for asking. And then we went for a bit of a wander. This football field grabbed my attention, and so I took a few shots with the M11-P as well as the Hussey. And as is so often the case, my favorite shots were the ones I took with the X-Pan crop. These photos are, again, nothing spectacular, but I like how clean and simple they are. We then realized that there was a huge old windmill looming in the background just outside of the village center, and that there also was a little footpath to get there. And since we didn't have anything better to do anyways, aside from my son and I giggling at each other, we decided to go and have a look at it. Oddly enough, we had to do a little river crossing with this raft thing where we had to pull ourselves along with a rope. Made me feel mildly adventurous. Anyway, once we arrived on the other side, I immediately pulled out my 907X again and fired off a few shots. Since the clouds were moving insanely fast that day, I basically had different light to work with every 10 seconds or so, and I think a few of these images are, well, okay, I guess. That is if you ignore the fact that I was shooting that windmill's backside the entire time. Once I realized that, I felt a bit stupid, to be honest, and so we made our way around to the other side to get some proper shots of that windmill as well. And my god, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but these things are just majestic and beautiful in a way. Again, I got a few shots on the 907X, but then I pulled out the M11-P with the 50mm Voigtlander lens on it, and I gotta say that I just love the atmosphere on these photos. Especially wide open, that 50mm Voigtlander lens has such a dreamy quality to it. Once we got back, I offered the missus to get some well-earned rest and took our little baby boy for a little stroll around the nearby fields, and obviously I also packed my M11-P. However, just a few minutes into our walk, it was clear to me that we were just a few moments away from getting seriously drenched, and so I fired off a few quick shots with the M11-P with the 50mm of the approaching rain clouds before chickening out and putting it away. I have no idea how weather resistant the M11-P is exactly, but it's also certainly not something that I want to learn the hard way. The following day we decided to go on yet another bike ride to a nearby town, and this time around it was to Domburg. And of course, the moment we arrived in Domburg, we went straight for a cafe to get some caffeine and some snacks. If you ever find yourself in Domburg, beer and Melken comes highly recommended. After our lunch we headed off on a little wander around the town center and towards the beach, and so I pulled out the old M11-P to grab a few photos. The results were so bad, however, that our boy shat himself in disappointment, and so after a little diaper change I decided to drown myself out in empty calories. All in all, the weather in Domburg certainly wasn't doing us any favors, at least not on that day. We actually went back to Domburg a few days later, and that time around we actually got some sunlight as well as a couple of half-decent photos. But yeah, for the time being, we then just decided to head back home, but luckily for us, later that day, the sky finally cleared up again. And so we decided to grab our bikes again and head off for dinner at a beachside restaurant. For this occasion, however, I decided against bringing the M11-P, and instead I decided to bring the Hasselblad 907X, the Q2, and the Canon V1 for vlogging, as well as a little tripod. And the main reason that I didn't bring the M11-P was that the Q2 is fairly weather and dust resistant, and I have some serious doubts what would happen if some of that fine-grained sand from the beach would get into the mechanics of the Leica M11-P or indeed of the Voigtlander lenses. And so yeah, having a sealed off unit like the Q2 in particular just gives you a peace of mind shooting in those types of situations. So yeah, we headed out on another beautiful bike ride and of course stopped a few times so that I could take a few more X-Pan shots of, well, sheep I suppose. We eventually arrived near the beach, parked up our bikes and headed to the restaurant, which is called the Botanist for anyone who is interested. Lovely restaurant, great drinks as well, good snack plates and just good vibes overall. And so, a few drinks later, we had the idea to let our boy play on the beach for the first time, which went brilliantly.
No.
truthfully, it was a wonderful ending to a beautiful day. And so I commemorated the occasion by also taking a few photos on my Q2 and the 907X. And so, even though we obviously did a whole lot more in the 2 weeks that we were there, I think this video does not need to be 2 hours long. And so let's just keep it at that for now and get into some final thoughts instead. Well, in regards to the vacation itself, we had a great time overall and time just flew by. And it's honestly been just a blessing to be able to spend this much time with my wife and kid. That's enough about the family stuff. Let's talk about what really matters in life, which is gear. So, the M11-P. What are my thoughts? Well, first of all, especially now looking back, it got quite obvious to me that I was only using the M11-P for about 40% or so of the time. I used the Hasselblad 907X for, let's say, another 40% of the time, and then about 15 or so percent of the time I was using the Leica Q2, and the remaining 5% of the time I was using something like the Sony ZV-E1 or the Insta360 Ace Pro 2, or maybe just my iPhone. But well, that fact alone really doesn't say a whole lot because, of course, if I have my Hasselblad with me, I will also want to use it. But with that said, is the M11-P a good family camera or not? Well, I mean, it certainly works, but it does have its drawbacks. First of all, obviously, it doesn't have autofocus, and especially the lack of weather resistance of any kind is kind of an issue for me, at least at times. And then obviously there are some drawbacks like not having IBIS. However, with that said, there are also a number of huge benefits to this camera, which actually led to me now using it as my daily sort of EDC camera, and it's certainly going to be in my arsenal for all kinds of vacations and trips that are yet to come. And let's just start with the most important one out of them all. And that is that when I'm using this camera with the rangefinder patch, I'm just much more present when I'm taking photos for whatever reason. It's probably just psychology. But if you've ever had the feeling that you were focusing on your photography too much and that you were not actually fully there, fully present, fully paying attention to your surroundings and to your family and to whatever's going on, that just does not happen with me when I'm using the Leica. It's just there with me. It's just helping me to get the shot. I'm looking through the glass straight at what's happening with the rangefinder. I can be very selective and picky about what I actually want to focus on, and I have nothing else in my window frame that would distract me from what's actually going on. And even though that can certainly also be a drawback sometimes, especially in this regard, I really found it just to be wonderful. This camera just never gets in the way. And also, once again, the process of using that rangefinder, especially with all of the things that I just mentioned, is just wonderful. It's just fun. It's just challenging enough to be engaging, but yet again, also an easy enough process so that you can get into it fairly quickly and so that it doesn't get in the way all the time. And then another thing that I also just love about this camera and the entire system overall is just how compact it is. I mean, look at this. This is a full frame camera with a 50mm f1.2 lens on it and a 60 megapixel sensor. It's a highly modern camera and it is, comparatively speaking, tiny. And I just love it. I obviously also love how it looks and how it feels and everything else. You know that already. But what I do love as well is that I can also just adapt the M mount lenses to my Sony ZV-E1, which is the camera that I'm using for video most of the time when I'm out and about. And so that's just wonderful because being able to use that sort of glass on my video camera as well, it's just nice. One thing I will add though is that I finally caved and got myself a thumb grip for the M11-P last week because with the weight of the brass silver version of this M11P. It was just too heavy, and at times it wasn't only uncomfortable to use it with one hand, but also it felt a bit risky. At times I really feared that I might drop it accidentally. Now that's pretty much fixed with the thumb grip, which costs a ridiculous amount of money. But hey, that's Leica, I suppose. And yeah, also without this thumb grip, I noticed that I got a number of photos that were slightly wonky, slightly tilting towards the left side, which was probably also because my hands were slipping and I was accidentally holding it slightly, leaning into that direction. But anyway, in closing, I will say that the M11P is probably certainly not everyone's cup of tea for a family camera, but I love it. And if you also generally like the idea of using a rangefinder, if you're okay with not getting every shot, especially if your kids are moving around a lot and so on, if you're not so much about, getting that tech sharp eye focusing all of the time, every time, but more about the process and being present and getting the feel of the shot and getting the feel of the moment, I think this might work for you as well. But does that now mean that I will not bring the Q2 or the Hasselblad going forward? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I am actually using this for like 80-90% of the time as my everyday camera nowadays. But going forward on bigger vacations, I will still probably just bring the entire load out because I loved it. I loved having the variety and having all of the different tools. It's just fun to me. It's a lot of weight to lug around, obviously, but yeah, again, I just loved it. And so probably most likely going forward, I will still bring at least the M11P and the Hasselblad as well, and maybe also the Leica Q2. We'll see about that, I guess. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was interesting to you. If you are interested in seeing more of my photography, feel free to hop over to Instagram because I started posting more regularly. And so I guess feel free to check it out. But yeah, I will see you in another video next week. Until then, take care.